Well, greetings, young scholars. I hope you have had and are still having a great Thanksgiving break. I certainly wanted to make some video lecture material on some of the reading from Falk that we, by not having class on Monday, didn't really get a chance to do. And I always feel like I should compensate. I'm sure you feel the same way. Anyway, this will give me a chance to hit on a few things that I think are really important. And what I'm going to do is do this all the way up to the point of the assigned reading for Monday. So you should do that. I will not talk about that. I'll go up to 188. But I do want to add that certainly while I ask you to take notes on this stuff and submit them, if I say anything that raises a question for you, or if I don't cover something in Falk that you want to talk about, make a note of it, and we'll bring it up on Monday. I don't want to leave stones unturned that should not be unturned. So roughly now, I'm going to jump in at page 156. He's been talking about the idea of human, basically what we call self-domestication over great long periods of time. He says don't get too caught up on the word domestication. But the idea would be that gradually hominid communities became increasingly adept at cooperation, at theory of mind, that is, of, again, beginning to realize that figure over there that is a lot like me, really is a lot like me, has sort of a thought world like me, and I can communicate with that person as language developed, whether sign or vocal or some other means. And gradually what you have then is a softening toward one another, a domestication. It's not like we have somebody that's domesticating us directly. Although, in the most general terms, both Falk and I would want to ascribe this to the presence of God in the world. The domestication, in that case, would be a taming finally, toward love, if you get right down to it. So on 156, I'm just going to jump in. He's talking about both genetic and culturally transmitted abilities or traits. And the top 156, about the last 6 lines, gene variants, over time with reproduction, that improve dexterity. And in this case, he means facial dexterity primarily, although he could also mean, it's possible that he also means like finger and hand dexterity. Certainly also means face, as we, the develop or the capacity to communicate through facial gestures, if you will, as would gene variants that improved effective communication, thereby teaching the next generation how to make good stone tools. See, once we begin to create these communities that can span time, I know I mentioned this, and span generations, you develop the capacity for passing on wisdom. To put it simply, wisdom for life. Ways of not just surviving, but of thriving and living together. There is a sense then in which the cultural practices shape the evolution of the species. And I love this line, the theological richness of that statement cannot be overstated, as we shall soon see. I like the next paragraph. I'm going to keep going. Just kind of work with me here. It is easy to envisage, I don't know why people don't just say envision, it's a lot easier, that cultural practices in a particular community or set of communities include those which lead to an increased sensitivity to the Spirit of God. So we have to keep in mind here then that this is an understanding of the world and of creation in which God has always been everlastingly present and laboring with creation in love and toward love. That's my theology. Since we cannot go back to experience firsthand what those communities were like, right, it is not possible to get specific about the practices that may have led to increased sensitivity to the Spirit's promptings. But it's not impossible that it could have included those drawings on the cave walls, and even some kind of a bare altar, though we might look at it and go, that's idolatry. They wouldn't have known that, and that's not what would have occurred to them. If we're right about that being a religious object, that bare altar that Falk talks about, this would be evidence of these early humans, Homo sapiens, reaching out beyond their everyday experience with a kind of quest for, the something more, capital S, capital M. And it wouldn't be a quest that they initiate. That's the point of grace here, what John Wesley called prevenient grace, though John Wesley had no idea about the evolution of human beings over great spans of time. He certainly did believe that the prevenient grace of God, which is nothing other than the Holy Spirit, God's own holy presence working in the world, that is always and consistently moving creation toward its betterment. And really that again finally comes down to love, the love that we have seen revealed and embodied in Jesus of Nazareth for us as Christians. I was going to say one more thing about that, but I lost it, so I'll keep going here. There is something contagious, however, about goodness that is the antithesis of another contagion, that of evil. The beauty of goodness can be passed on culturally generation to generation in a way that shapes a community. Parents teach children. Grandparents teach children. Aunts and uncles teach nieces and nephews. It takes a village, all that good stuff, right? And this kind of sense of regard for others and even respect, I suspect, grew gradually. But 1 John, he then appeals to 1 John, by the way, John Wesley's favorite biblical document, and my favorite in the New Testament, Matthew. 1 John tells us that, quote, if we love one another, and this is interesting language, if we love one another, God lives in us, and God's love is perfected in us, or perfected among us. Maybe in class sometime we'll be able to talk about that further, but for now we'll just leave that quotation as it is. Of course, Falk says, we are aware that this was written to a specific group of early Christians, well after the time that he's speculating about. But it still applies to us in today's culture, despite the vast difference of our world compared to that of 2,000 years ago. Similarly, surely those words would have applied to those super ancient cultures scores of millennia ago in Africa. If we love one another, God dwells in our midst, and God's love finds its perfection or its fulfillment among us. As some of those small groups chose to center their cultures in loving relationships, God would have lived in them, or really closer to the Greek there, lived in their midst as well, just like John told the community to which he was writing so long ago. And as that happened, generation after generation, it would have led to domestication-like changes in our species. The acquisition of domestication-like genetic changes is exactly what one would expect if the God of Christian theology is real, and if our primate genetic makeup were being transformed because a population or a set of populations, he says, we couldn't know, right, was living into the love of God for a period of time. Now I want to pause here maybe for the rest of this little video and talk about the significance of this. It's certainly potentially controversial. It does raise questions about traditional Christian teaching, insofar as what Falk is suggesting is that in the process of evolution, he's speculating that there took root among some early hominids, maybe pre-Homo sapiens, in fact, this growing capacity, we'll just say, for love, for other regard, for, just not just respect, but care, empathy, all of these things. And this would have been built up over time toward the creation of what we would now think of as human beings. Now notice then that that's a movement upward to a kind of quote unquote Eden-like existence, although on a very small scale, right? A little community where love is beginning to take root, maybe over several generations. That seems to be Falk's suggestion here. Whereas, of course, in traditional Christian teaching, and I mean like traditional as in centuries long, certainly we'll also say pre-Darwin, the idea was that God created a perfect creation at the beginning, right? Or at least a very good one. Sometimes that perfect thing has been oversold. But a very good creation with these beautiful and loving two people, Adam and Eve, who then through their disobedience to God fall into the power of sin themselves, but also, along with their fall, in a sense, drag all of creation with them. And so you have, again, the Christian doctrine of a fall, whereas at least at this point, Falk is really talking more of like a Christian doctrine of an upward climb, right? And this upward climb isn't necessary, or it's not inevitable progress, anything like that. But Falk is suggesting that the achievement of human consciousness and self-consciousness, self-awareness, and therefore the capacity to ask, what am I? Who am I? What am I here for? Where do we come from? That all of this was a very gradually developing capacity for our ancestors. So the bottom line there being the two very different ways of thinking about, we'll say, early humanity. One is, if not perfect, at least really, really, really good, who then somehow, despite being really, really, really good, do something really, really, really stupid, and then just mess it all up, the fall. Or this other way of trying to think about the evolution of the human species toward, not perfection, but toward love, within whatever capacities, the situation, the environment, the physical and mental development of these creatures would allow, that there's this movement, again, over a great deal of time that will involve both genetic and cultural inheritance that leads eventually to what we would call Homo sapiens, wise beings. I don't know if we've gotten there yet.